Check those clocks, smart or dumb, not you, the clock. Does it have a hand? Is it on your hand? Check that clock, because it is a time.
Maybe it's in somebody's pocket, Josh.
To think.
Somebody's perhaps old-fashioned, traditional, has a pocket watch.
If someone wants to get us monogrammed, inscribed, or something pocket watches for a time to think, then I'd be happy for you to use that money.
Yeah.
For you to use that money for us in that way.
If there are any train conductors listening to this right now, you probably have the shortest path to getting a pocket watch. You could do a time to think pocket watch, and we wouldn't turn it down, I don't think.
Yeah, that's something that 17-year-old Josh would have eaten up, is going to school with a pocket watch.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Chris, say something funny to start off this podcast.
Well, it's not funny. It's serious, but
That's
people may
not what
laugh
I
at
asked.
it. Josh, something that I recently heard. I heard a long time ago, in fact, as well. With great power.
Which one was it? Was it a long time ago or recently?
I just heard it again. With great power comes great responsibility.
Okay, so 3 people got that joke.
No, more than 3 people. Many more than 3 people. Millions, in fact, who have watched Key and Peele's hilarious
millions
skit
who are
on
now listening
being
to A Time
prepared
to
for
Think.
Terry's. It is, it's great stuff. But, there is a good lesson there that with great power comes great responsibility, which means that as you have the opportunity to listen to A Time to Think and you're hearing these different worldview associated discussions where, perhaps you don't know a lot about something, you walk away with more knowledge. Knowledge is power. NBC told me that the more I know, when I would watch Saved by the Bell reruns, the more I know, that would be helpful. G.I. Joe told me that knowing is half the battle. And so if knowing is half the battle, if knowledge is power, if the more I know something or other happens, then what you're listening to right now in A Time to Think.
This is power.
It is power.
Yeah,
and with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
Which means as you walk away from this podcast today, listener,
you just got dumber a little bit, and now we're going to hope to make you smarter after.
No, they learned a lesson, and the lesson is regarding responsibility. And they must exercise that responsibility with what they're about to learn today, which is our final episode on Islam. Not the Nation of Islam. That's Malcolm X. We're talking about Islam, the 1,500-year-old Christian heresy, effectively.
Yeah.
Right?
So that was Chris Tillman.
Yeah, correct.
Pastors the church in Stevens Point.
Dr. Christopher Tillman.
And he showed you his doctorate with the way that he pronounces common words that everyone knows that apparently he doesn't.
And by the time this is heard by many people, Master Joshua Holland.
Yeah, you can call me Master Holland. If there's anything that the Master of Divinity has taught me, it's that I'm not a Master of Divinity. There's so many books I haven't read, Chris.
There may be an opus in your future.
So many footnotes I haven't tracked down. Yeah. I'm Josh. I pastor a church in Wausau, Wisconsin. Together, we combine forces to produce power, apparently, here on A Time to Think.
You get yours, Josh.
Chris, you just said something that you said Christian heresy, which has brought to mind that as I've thought about the goal of this series on pluralism, I think the more I've thought about it, the more I realize that we need to know 2 different audiences. So audience number 1 is Christians talking to Christians. And there's a way in which Christians can talk to Christians plainly about something like Islam, or next episode Mormonism, or following episodes Jehovah's Witnesses.
Sure.
Where we might use words like Christian heresy. And by that we mean something that has come after Christianity and has altered Christianity. It's not a new worldview, right? So we've talked about Islam, where Muhammad has the night journey, and he really builds off the back of the patriarchs and Jesus and Moses to say, hey, I'm greater than them. So it is a heresy. It's a distortion of a former thing.
It references Jesus in some capacity, right?
And that's fundamentally different than something like Buddhism, which is not a Christian heresy. It's just bad. So
it's heresy.
When we're talking Christian to Christian, we can speak plainly like that. I mean, one of the things we wrestled with in the earliest episode is at the very beginning, we said, this is a ripoff. And we said, well, can we say that? Well, Christian to Christian, while speaking in humility, we want to be clear with our language when something is in fact a distortion of Christianity, when it's a false religion, when it's a cult. Some of the things that we'll have upcoming have cultish elements of excommunication that would be different than how we see excommunication in a Christian worldview. So we want to be clear with our language.
Social isolationism, cult of personality, devotion to a particular human leader, those types of things, right?
So point being, in some conversations, it is appropriate to say something like, that is a cult, or that is heresy, or that is a Christian heresy.
Right.
And also, we need to know when our audience shifts and when we are talking to someone who happens to be in that heresy,
right,
or has been captive to it, or is in a cult. And one of the things that multiple teachers have said that as I've been listening to different things on Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness and Islam is like, no one is actually persuaded by you saying, you're in a cult. And they're like, oh, I didn't even know that.
I didn't know that.
Thank you for showing me. Just like if someone came to you as a Christian and said, you're in a cult, you'd be like, okay, did you try at all to understand what I believe?
Right.
And so I just want to point that out because even in my own heart, I've been trying to figure out, when do I say that is a cultish heresy? And when do I say, let me help you see the cracks in the foundation and help you see the beauty of Jesus Christ? And the difference is the audience. Yep. It really is. So as we are discussing things on this podcast, we're going to discuss them more clearly and plainly because quite honestly, the assumption is we don't have a high percentage of religious skeptics and non-believers. We're pastoring a church. This podcast is largely for the people in our church. And also, we want the people in our church to know that if you encounter someone who believes in these various false religions, don't start with, you have a false religion.
Right.
Start with seeking to understand their religion in a way that you could then help them see why it's false.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right.
Anything you'd add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I think the other component to that is important, which is...
So I left out the important part, is what you're saying?
No, it's also important.
Oh,
right?
oh,
Just
and...
trying to exercise responsive trilaterance here. And
you
it is
terrible.
Yeah, thank you. So it is to say that we are engaging people, right? And so it's hard because when we talk ideas, when we talk theory, when we talk theology, we talk philosophy, there are abstract realities that we address in many instances, but these abstract realities do make the worldview and decision-making process of individuals what they are. And so when somebody's making a decision, I mean, go to the, probably like the worst of the worst calls. Think about like the Manson family, right? Charles Manson and everything. I mean, obviously the dude did some evil stuff and he encouraged people to do evil stuff. Now, why is that? We can talk about obviously the spiritual nature of that and the demonic influence involved there. But at the end of the day, these people had what they thought was a convincing enough worldview for them to make rational decisions. Now, they're irrational decisions, but sin is irrational. And so if we understand that what we're dealing with heresy, we're dealing with in bad theology and all these types of things, like these are ultimately these are not simply intellectual wrongnesses that we're addressing, right? These are things that ultimately are rooted in a rebellion against the God who is, which is a moral issue. And so to believe wrongly about God in these fundamental ways is actually a sin issue. And so when we're talking with people regarding bad theology, we're addressing people in their sin. We're not just addressing people as a disembodied mind who needs to come to a different conclusion. And so this is where, in the school both of us have gotten our master's degree from at this point, the presuppositional
You're being very
approach.
presumptuous. I still have like 2 assignments to turn in.
Well, you'll get them done. But the presuppositional approach recognizes something that Cornelius Van Til, and going all the way back to Calvin, I would say specifically, the idea of the noetic effects of sin, right? So that sin has...
That's how sin affects Noah?
Noah, yeah, the noetic effects of sin. But it is the mind, right?
Yeah.
So nous in Greek, it's the mind. So what is it that sin has done to how people think? And then when we engage people over matters of intellect, and as that intellect pertains to theology, philosophy, worldview, we're dealing with something that's been impacted by sin. So these are whole beings that we're interacting with here, which is why when we talk about this in the abstract, which is what we're effectively doing in our podcast, we're talking in the abstract. We're not talking about individual stories or cases of people that we know. You are going to talk to people, and some of those people you meet may ascribe to these different things a sense of confidence and say, yes, these are good things that ought to be believed. Just want you to know that like Josh said, we're not looking to come to conclusions together here that you argue somebody by saying, you're wrong, I'm right. Here are some a few pointers that we learned, and now you must believe differently, right? We're dealing with people right here. And so just to keep that in view as we finish this discussion of Islam up, move towards other things.
And honestly, the beauty, Chris, of thinking, so maybe you're more of a feeler. Actually, Chris, you'd probably describe yourself as someone who operates with your gut first.
I feel things,
you are,
and I know things.
Kids say big-brained.
There we go.
You operate off intuition and gut.
Sure.
I tend to be more like the gut follows the head.
Why you hurt my feelings all the time.
Yeah, my gut needs to be trained by my head. But there are different types of people. Some people really value some people will just think about anything for fun. Other people is like, why does this matter? Show me how this is going to be practically helpful before I think about it. And so here's one of the ways that this is practically helpful. If we're actually engaging not primarily with concepts, but with people, knowing the concepts really well helps us to engage better with the people.
Correct.
Instead of being defensive.
Yes.
Because defensiveness is part of those noetic effects of the fall. Mm-hmm. When I'm more concerned about how I look or more fearful about what happens if I'm wrong, then I am unable to actually sober-mindedly deal with the thing in front of me because I'm thinking about myself.
Right.
And when we think about ourselves, our view of the world becomes so narrow. How many times have you been in an argument with someone and you leave it and you think, man, there was this really simple thing I could have said that would have been either helpful or would have won the argument. And it's like, well, I couldn't think about the simple thing because I was worried about how I looked. I was worried about winning. I was worried about getting out of the uncomfortability. And
this is like the scripture that says, correct your opponents with defensiveness, right? That's what we're commanded to do.
And swords. So the point being is we're starting to think through these things so that we can have a confidence in order that when we deal with people, whether it's the simplicity of someone saying, hey, all religions are basically the same, we don't have to go, nuh-uh. Right. We can instead go, hey, that's wrong. Or we're dealing with someone who is part of a Christian heresy and they come with their own receipts because, as we'll talk about, various Christian heresies are often better catechized than Christians are.
Right.
And so we're not just going to give you a 3-step argument to defeat every Muslim, Mormon, or like that would be dealing with concepts, not people.
Right.
But if you've at least spent some time, a couple hours per religion by the time we're done with each of these podcasts, you're going to be confident enough to stand before someone and think, okay, I know the distinctives of Christianity. I know where some of these other ones err and why they're different.
Right.
I know when they're using language that seems similar, but the meaning of the language is very different.
Correct.
And therefore, I can engage with the person in front of me rather than being caught off guard, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's really our goal here in Pluralism, a Failed Project. We're going to do one more episode on Islam, kind of catch you up to speed, maybe catch us up to speed. Here's what we've kind of talked about so far with Islam. We've talked about the nature of the Quran, and we've talked about the origins of Islam. With many of these Christian heresies, we want to at least wonder why they were centuries later than Christianity and why they tried to build off the back of Christianity while changing core elements.
Yep.
That's at the very least historically relevant. Which one came first and why others came later.
Yeah.
Islam is the earliest of them, 600-700 years after Christ.
What was that, Josh? How many years?
So, gosh, and that's the end of the podcast. I will not.
My son, who will be listening at some point here, is probably making these ridiculous gesticulations with his hands. Listen.
So you can pronounce gesticulation, but
I
not
can.
responsibility.
Responsibility.
Okay. So we've talked about the historical origins of Islam, how Muhammad quite likely had a desire to unify a disparate people under monotheism, how there's often in the Quran an awareness of Christianity, but it's wrong. So an awareness of things like Jesus' early life, but then additions to Jesus' early life. We'll talk today a little bit about the Trinity and how the Quran has an awareness that Christians claim Trinity, but not always an awareness of what the claim actually is. And so we've talked about that. We've talked about how we should probably equate the Quran with Jesus rather than Muhammad with Jesus, because the Quran is co-eternal with Allah, not Muhammad, just like Jesus is eternal with the Father. However, there's some oddities with the Quran, because if the Quran is eternal and it's Arabic eternally, why did the Arabic language come into existence in time and space?
Right.
If the Quran is eternal and perfect, then why did it need to be changed over time? Change over time is wrong. Abrogated over time.
Yes,
developed
exactly.
over time. Why did the eternally existent Quran need to be revealed over 22 years? So this is where you probably want to start if you're if you're talking to a Muslim, you don't want to start by saying, well, the Bible says, because built into a lot of these false religions is a belief in the Bible that we have as mistranslated or misinterpreted or corrupted. So saying, well, the Bible says doesn't actually appeal to their sources, but you want to be able to say, so why did this Quran have to be revealed piecemeal? Why is it different in the first 6 or so years than it is when Muhammad got power? Why is that?
Yeah, some of the best apologetics is in the form of questioning, right? Where you actually put somebody in a position to, and this is where presuppositionalism helps us and how we engage others to say, like, look, can you help me understand? Let's trace this back to the source. What are your assumptions? Really, where does this lead, right? So you just ask questions of people to get them to come to their own conclusions first, and then you can help them along in the way of truth.
Yeah, and this is where this has to do with Mormonism, but I think it's also applicable to Islam. One of the things that Dr. James White has said is that when someone is under an authoritarian religion basically don't think, just believe what we tell you. That's very clear in things like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses. It's tangentially clear in things like Islam. When that happens, the best thing is not to say, here's an argument against that, because there will be rehearsed responses to said arguments, and oftentimes those people are better rehearsed than you.
Right.
The trick is to help them think for themselves and to do those questions. So, okay, if you know the Muslim has been told all their life that the Quran is utterly perfect and the Bible is corrupt, can you help them wonder about what you see as perceived corruption of the Quran? You're not even defending the beauty of the Bible yet. You're just helping them think for themselves. So that's one thing. Let's look through some of the comparisons of themes in Islam and themes in Christianity, because I think two things are kind of true here at the same time, Chris. At one level, we want to be aware of the distinctives of each religion, the ways they use language. At another level, I think really the crux of the issue in most false religions compared to Christianity is the nature of God, the nature of salvation, and the nature of heaven. And so in one way, we could do this whole podcast series with one episode. Here's the Christian nature of God, triune. Here's the Christian nature of salvation, justification by faith. Here's the Christian nature of heaven, face-to-face before God eternally. And then we could say, look for how that is different in every religion in the world, and you'll be fine.
I would add one more thing in there. The toothbrush.
Oh man, I left an important thing out again.
And we'll go back to our friend Calvin on this, but knowledge consists of knowledge of God and oneself, right? And so what does a particular worldly religion teach about man? What is the nature of man? And I think that's very important as we evaluate
sin
any of this.
Probably along with that.
Yes. Sin and man in relationship to God. Yeah.
So my point being is that there are 2 or 3 or 4, once you ask Chris, really central things that we could just say, hey, get this right about Christianity and you'll see how everything else differs. At the same time, those things are often illuminated by seeing the various ways the other religion distorts that. So for instance, with the Trinity, the Quran and Islam is very concerned to say that God is utterly monotheistic, utterly singular. That's why the greatest sin in Islam is shirk, which is the equating of partners with Allah. And so it's quite interesting. Remember, historically, the Quran comes after Christianity, a time where some man, a man who died but was resurrected, is equated as a partner with God.
Right.
And then a few hundred years later, there comes about this sin of equating partners with God. Okay, so we want to think about that historical curiosity. Let's just run down a little bit of Trinity and Quran. Yeah, the sin of shirk. One thing that comes up with the nature of God in Islam is that because God is utterly singular and distant, so in Christianity, we have this thing called transcendence and immanence, which means, think about the Isaiah passage. He is high and lifted up, but also dwells with the lowly and contrite in heart. We have the Elohim described of creation in Genesis 1 and the Yahweh described in the intimacy nearness of creation in Genesis 2, and they're not different people. They're the same person. And so in the scriptures, we have both the Lord of heaven and earth and the angel of the Lord who keeps showing up in Genesis. He is far and near. He's high and low. That is not true in Islam. Allah is just far.
Yeah.
And strictly speaking, he's unknowable. So in Christianity, we have a God who is knowable both in his character and his purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So we can know things about him. He is light, and in him there is no darkness at all.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a little bit abstract if you think about it, but it is a statement about who he is.
Mm-hmm.
God is love. God is holy. These are character attributes. Strictly speaking, in Islam, we only know his will. That's why it's an obedience-based religion, because we don't know him. We just know what he wants us to do.
What he tells us to do. Yep.
And let's see if there's anything else relevant before I ask you a question. Another thing, because God is strictly speaking unknowable, there's this thing that's introduced called voluntarism. Mm-hmm. It basically means that because God is free to do whatever he wants, he can do whatever he wants. Why is voluntarism, in that short definition, because God is free to do whatever he wants, he can do everything he wants? Why doesn't that sound like Christianity?
No,
why is that not? What's different? Isn't the God of the Bible free to do what he wants?
Yeah. So this is actually something that comes up. I remember when I took, I think it was Philosophy 110, and this was over 25 years ago now, Josh.
Whoa.
I know, like that just makes me feel really ancient right now. But back in the year 2000, when I started college, one of the things that shows up in these like undergrad level philosophy classes, a lot of times people will, try to come up with gotcha questions,
right.
Stump you questions, because this is the place where the newly minted atheist can kind of come out to everybody and express his or her power in words and logical argumentation and say, well, if God is all powerful, can he make a rock that even he can't lift? And be like, oh, gotcha. And that's really, I remember hearing that for the first time 25 years ago plus. And
did it seem compelling when you heard it?
Well, on the face of it, there's this initial sense of like, oh, what about? But it takes roughly 10 seconds to dispel that, because...
All right, you got 10 seconds.
Yeah, well, don't time me.
You just wasted 3.
Don't come at me. I'm going to keep on telling you to not do things. Here's the thing. For God to be who he is, he can't act contrary to who he is.
Right.
And so this idea that somehow, God is free to do as he pleases, the Judeo-Christian, and I do want to insert here Judeo-Christian because Christian theology overlaps with Jewish theology.
Right. It fulfills Jewish theology.
Yes, exactly. It's a fulfillment of Jewish theology. Now, obviously, the Jewish people reject, God's revelation of himself as triune in nature, which is a sad, heartbreaking reality. This is where Jesus himself repeatedly said, I am, I am, I am. He keeps telling it to them, and they reject him. But that being said, we're still working from the same, 39 books of the Old Testament. And so, for God to be who he is, he acts in accordance with his nature. And this is how God operates. He doesn't do things that are out of step with who he is, because it will just speak logically. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
For God to be God, he must do God things.
So it's like, can God lie?
Right. And so the answer is, of course,
true.
Yes.
So in one way, you could say he cannot lie, not because he is lacking power to lie, but because his character will not allow for that possibility.
Exactly. And so, it's just bring it down to, maybe human levels of things and saying, like, oh, you know what? If you're this, then why don't you do this? And well, the simple answer to any of those questions is because I wouldn't do that. Right. So, Chris, if you are so this, then why don't you just give all of this? It's like, well, there are limitations, right? So we deal with limitations.
The real practical import, and I think if you're a parent listening to this, here's a freebie. You're paying for the rest of the podcast, but this one's free. When you're thinking about the 10 Commandments, what is unique about Judeo-Christianity is those things are rooted in the character of God.
Exactly.
And so these are not arbitrary commands that make you good enough before God if you fulfill them. And so, okay, why should we not cheat on our wives? Well, there's a commandment not to do it, but it's actually rooted in the fact that God is a faithful husband who pursues an adulterous bride. The entire narrative of the scriptures is of a faithful husband pursuing an unfaithful bride. And when we meet that God, we say, I should be faithful to my wife.
And there's serious conditions attached to violating that, right?
And why should we tell the truth? Well, God is true. And it would be a big fat bummer if God could lie. because God has said a lot of stuff that I really want him to come true on.
Sure.
I mean, I'm regularly on a Sunday reminding people that they can take his word to the bank.
Yep.
And if we couldn't, then it's terribly sad. And so when we think about even moral principles, this is where it ties into voluntarism.
Yeah.
If voluntarism is true, if God's just free to do whatever he wants, then ultimately his actions are arbitrary and our actions are arbitrary. But if all of the moral commands in this world are actually rooted in the character of God, nothing he does or we do is arbitrary.
Right.
We are either matching the character of God, he is fulfilling his own character, we are violating that character, but it's not arbitrary. And this is important because this is not just about, okay, now I know the word voluntarism, and I know that philosophically speaking, it's untenable. Mm-hmm. But actually, if God's morality is voluntaristic, then there becomes a bigger problem for us as humans, which is what he does with sin or transgression. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Christian worldview, God is just in his character, and he is holy. So he cannot overlook sin.
Right.
Because of his character. So he has to do something. And that's where miraculously we get Romans 3, that at the same time God was both just and the justifier of all who have faith in Christ Jesus, because he proved himself just and righteous at the cross by punishing sin, and he made you just and righteous before him by freeing you from sin. Yeah. But he did not violate his character. He didn't do something arbitrary at the cross. Strictly speaking, Allah can forgive sins in Islam, but it is arbitrary. Now, what does that mean for us? How will you know if he'll do it?
Right.
Okay, so the Islamic doctrine of kind of salvation is that in an ideal world, your good deeds will outweigh your bad. That's why it's a practice-based religion. You've got those 5 pillars that we talked about of you've got pilgrimage, you've got your 5 prayers, you've got fasting and alms. Do those things, good deeds outweigh the bad. But one of the ways that we can, and I've heard this from converted Muslims that have converted to Christianity, one of the great ways we can minister to someone in Islam is by basically begging the question, what if he won't forgive you? And what confidence do you have? Because largely speaking, Islam is coming from a shame and honor culture. So what does someone do with shame? What does someone do when they know their good deeds won't outweigh their bad?
Sure.
What does someone do when they have no hope in the arbitrary forgiveness of Allah? And those are really, so once again, it's not just about knowing a philosophical term and why it doesn't work, but it's about seeing how that tracks down to salvation and gives no hope to the person who needs to be saved.
Right.
Reflections on that.
So Dr. Frame's perspectival approach, tri-perspectivalism, approaches...
It's not like a square.
No, it's not like a square.
Or a rectangle.
No, it's a triangle, in fact, yeah. And so coming at things from different angles, what we notice is that if we're going to overemphasize on one particular perspective, we may lose the kind of the wholeness of what we're looking at. And so when we think about, the Muslim approach toward the kind of omnipotence of God, right? You think, all right, so God is all powerful, or God is transcendent. Okay, so it is true, God is transcendent, but there is more to God than his transcendence.
Yeah,
and so these different perspectives that we approach, we'll look at things and think, okay, is God able to forgive sin? Yes, he's able to forgive sin. On what basis can he forgive sin? And so we start asking these different questions and thinking, okay, if the Christian religion is not simply a matter of do, and you just figure these things out, you do them, you follow this rote prescription, and this is how things work, but instead, God is actually actively working in the human heart. What's interesting, even in Christian obedience, is that God works immanently in the human heart, right? He works inside. This is the new covenant promise, working inside, to create obedience to transcendent commandments, right? And so the same commandments that come to Mount Sinai are the commandments that we honor God with today. So no other gods before me, right? First commandment that we have. How is it that we obey that? Do we obey that simply because we have decided that we're going to obey that? Or do we obey that because God has worked inside of the human heart? And so as we think, about these different perspectives that we approach worldview, religion, and so forth from, we can see how like an overbalancing within Islam betrays the fact that it's not genuine, because we're missing components here. Yeah. So we might say, yes, there is transcendence. Yes, there is, the phrase, the inshallah, right? It's the, God willing, Allah willing, right? okay, cool. The Bible tells us to say, if the Lord wills, we'll
Right.
do this and that. But the will of Allah in Islam is unknowable. In Christianity, the will of God is knowable. Not in the same way, though, right? So like the will of God in Christianity is knowable in as much as he has told us what is good and is right, and wisdom precepts that we follow and everything. This is what is, God's will, your sanctification. Okay?
Right.
This is the will of God, your sanctification. There are other things, though, that are hidden from us as far as God's eternal purposes and plans. So there are these two different components within Islam. Yes, we can say Allah has a will for people, and that's obedience, but he's removed from that. So he's not actually actively involved in it. Here, he's told you what to do, figure it out for yourself, and then at some point, you may or may not actually have pleased him, but you can't know that with any degree of certainty because he is removed from you. And so what I just love about the triperspectival approach that Dr. Frame and Dr. Poitras have worked hard on over the past several decades is to just say, look, there are so many different angles that you can appreciate and evaluate legitimacy and truth regarding philosophy, worldview, and religion that ultimately are going to net for us the conclusion that Christianity takes into account all these different aspects and presents a conclusion that is consistent and that's satisfying.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there is something to be said with satisfaction. So Christianity is not true because it's our favorite thing, right? We don't approach religion and say, what do we like the most? And that we're going to say we are satisfied, and so we'll get to truth from there. At the same time, when we see the truth of Christianity, we do realize it's the most satisfying in terms of who God is. Is God pantheistically near and involved, intertwined with the creation, or transcendently Islamically far and removed from the creation? Or is he both high and lifted up and dwells with the lowly and contrite in heart? Yeah. And there's it's more satisfying to see. It's not satisfying. It's not true because it's satisfying, but it is satisfying because it's true. And the same with this next point of difference between Islam and Christianity is Islam presents your basic eternal physical paradise.
Sure.
You can get physical pleasure if you're obedient. Now, one, I would put in people's minds, if you can think up the religion, it's probably false. Can you think up a God who's far off, commands obedience, and will give you physical pleasure if you obey? I could get there.
Yeah.
Can you think up a God who is 3 in 1, will sacrifice himself to cover your sin, and wants to dwell for eternity with you and him face to face? And that's actually the biggest part
of heaven. And both calls you out for being horrible and loves you at the same time.
It's like, no, I can't actually get there. That's the reason why most false religion diverges at the point of the Trinity is because it seems irrational to the human mind. Right. So just to put that, it's a curiosity of mine that it seems to me I could come up with enough time, come up with most false religions as a human, but I couldn't come up with Christianity in that story. It's too wonderful. It's too complex. Now, the big difference is what's more satisfying? The idea that obedience gets me physical pleasure. I mean, that's kind of cool. Or the idea that God wants to be personally present with me for all eternity in a way that with he and I, we and him face to face, there will be eternal joy and bliss before we even talk about the physical paradise.
Right.
The physical paradise is icing on the cake. I mean, it's beautiful, it's real, it's there. And
it's
yet
the setting.
The vision of his face after we have been cleansed and we can ascend the hill of the Lord with clean hands and a pure heart. I mean, that's heaven. And so, yeah, Muslims believe in heaven, just like Mormons believe in an afterlife. But the vision of being face-to-face with the triune God is utterly unique, and I think more satisfying, because we are personal creatures.
Right.
We long to be in a room with someone face-to-face who knows us, is not ashamed of us, is not leaving us. And that's really the ultimate vision of heaven, is God himself, who could very well be ashamed of us, no longer having any shame in his face because he has removed the shame from us by his son and by ridding us of our sin. Yeah. And now he and we dwell together. So that's ultimately more satisfying. And that's another point where we could engage with Muslim brothers and sisters. We haven't really talked about the Trinity, though. And I think, Chris, this is going to set us up for our next few podcasts, because the Trinity is huge in terms of false religion. The point of departure for Islam, for Mormonism, for Jehovah's Witnesses, it really is Jesus God? Is he equated with the Father? Is he a mere mortal? Is he a creation? All those different things. I've got receipts on this, but the Quran very explicitly says, do not say Trinity. Now, one comment on receipts here. One of the reasons I'm not quoting surah after surah, which is the Quran's chapter, is because we can't actually accomplish in these podcasts giving you enough information that you will be an invincible arguer before someone. The stark reality of particularly these three religions that I've been naming, Mormonism, Islam, and Jehovah's Witnesses, the people who believe them probably know more than you. And that's because by nature they are catechized better than you. They have been told what the answer is, what your question is, and what the answer to your question is. And so the reality, Chris, is even after spending a few hours and a few years studying these things in seminary, I don't necessarily immediately feel equipped to handle most arguments that someone might throw at me from an Islamic point of view. What we need to know, though, is we can have enough of a base to see the basic differences in the religion and a love for the other person that will lead us to do something like, I need to go think about that. Can I think about that and get back to you? Because the reality is, if we want to, the stories I've heard of Muslims coming to faith in Christ, these are 5 to 7 to 9 year stories. This ain't a one shot, you won the argument and someone decided to leave their community type of thing.
Right, yeah.
The same thing is going to be true with Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. This is not happening in one conversation. On one hand, that's sobering because we're going to have to work hard. Like if we really want to reach someone who is captive to a Christian heresy, you're going to have to do some work because you love them and you want them to see the truth. At the same time, it should be freeing because you don't have to feel that you're in a position to make sure you have every argument buttoned up.
Right.
You have the freedom to say, can I get back to you on that? And maybe think about this while we're like in between. What I do think we need to be able to defend pretty quickly, though, Chris, is the triune God. Because Muslims say that the Trinity is illogical. And that, let's see, I got a couple different things here.
And the response is, you're illogical, man.
Right? So for a Muslim, God is Allah is transcendent, uniquely one. The Trinity is illogical. Jesus is not God. He is a messenger. Chris, what do you think the average Christian needs to know about the Trinity as we're trying to think about defending that core doctrine to false religions?
Yeah, I mean, square 0.1, I guess we'll put it like that, 'cause it can't be quite square zero, is that the doctrine of the Trinity is essential. Okay, now, the reason I bring that up as a matter of first importance is because the Bible presents this as, to know God is to know God as he is. And we can't say we know God if we know the God who isn't, right? We know the God who is. And so throughout, especially John's material, 1 John talks about this, who is the Antichrist? Okay, now we're not talking capital A Antichrist left behind, the one who sets himself up to oppose God and the temple. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about who is the one who does not rightly understand Christ, who does not understand who Jesus is. Well, the one who denies, right? So there's somebody who is actively denying something on some level. And so it's important for us to understand as Christian people, the doctrine of the Trinity is of first importance. Now, because it is at the core of the nature of God. Yes, who God actually is.
It's core because it's core to who God is.
Yes, exactly. And so when we think about this is why, just to be clear with people who are listening, you may engage a Roman Catholic or somebody who's part of the Orthodox Church, and you may engage them and recognize that their doctrine of salvation is wrong. Okay, the way that they get to reconciliation with God, they get forgiveness, they get justification may be wrong, but we're still dealing with the same God. Okay, we're still dealing with the triune God. We subscribe to the same councils in terms of the historic, ecumenical councils. So Chalcedon, Nicaea, these are things that we agree on. We agree on God is triune in nature. This is why you can have, I'm going to say debates, but you can have conversations with people that don't need to fundamentally alter our understanding of who God is. Instead, what we're dealing with is coming to a biblical understanding of how God relates towards sinful people and his saving activity. When you're engaging a Jehovah's Witness, and specifically we're going to say here a Mormon, because the Mormons have done a very, very intentional job for the past couple of decades now, making inroads among evangelicals by making statements that suggest that they are Christians too. Okay, and I'm just going to put that in quotation marks, Christians too, meaning they have made the effort.
You didn't actually use your air quotes.
I didn't do that because
People didn't see it because we don't have a video.
I'm holding a cord right now because apparently the microphone may be cutting out at some point. So
only when you have bad takes.
Yeah, exactly. So, that they are Christians too. That's what their convincing effort. There's something I just saw the other day. Todd Friel, who does Wretched Radio.
We just do a Wretched podcast.
Yeah, I know. Todd is great. Todd's fantastic. I've really, enjoyed
He's not
his
my
work
cup
over
of
the
tea.
years. Well, you know what?
Just want to throw that out in case anyone else doesn't like the flavor. I know one person who really likes the flavor, but, we all like different flavors.
Yeah, well, I like Todd. Todd just put something out the other day where he commented on an interview that Dallas Jenkins had with two of the kind of premier Mormon apologists. And so he, if you're not familiar with Dallas Jenkins is the creative mind behind The Chosen. Okay, the series The Chosen. Now, people have had different opinions regarding The Chosen over the years.
We might have to finally do a podcast on The Chosen when we're talking about Mormonism.
Yeah, potentially. And I've never been a fan of The Chosen, and here's the reason why. Maybe this is just kind of some of my I don't know, we'll call my Presbyterian roots under my Baptist identity that I want to bring into this, is that I think we're violating the second commandment pretty regularly in The Chosen, right? We are putting a face to God, and we're putting words in God's mouth that are not actually in the Bible. So that's a problem for me. I've never been a fan of The Chosen, primarily because of that. Not because I think it's teaching people horrible, terrible, awful things, but because I think we have to stick with what Scripture says if we're going to represent Jesus. But Dallas Jenkins is the creative force behind this. I believe it's his father, who is Jerry Jenkins. I believe that's correct. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll take responsibility for that in another episode. I'm going to correct myself. But Jerry Jenkins was the creative force behind the Left Behind books. He and Tim LaHaye were the authors of the Left Behind series. So what Dallas Jenkins said in this podcast, and he's said this before, is he says that there are Christian people in the Mormon church, that there are genuine Christian people who genuinely love Jesus and really know who Jesus is in ways that even some professing evangelicals
What's funny
may not
because
understand.
Tucker Carlson recently said that there's a lot of Muslims that love Jesus, but what that means is they respect him as a prophet.
Right.
So we'll talk about, maybe the introduction to our next podcast will be about language. When someone says something, ask them what they mean.
What does it mean?
If a Muslim say, no, we love Jesus, who is he and why do you love him?
Tell me what that means.
You have to ask follow-up questions.
Exactly.
Because who is Jesus and why does a Mormon love him?
And this is what's disturbing about the Dallas Jenkins statement, is that Dallas Jenkins has what we would call a background that he should know better. Mm-hmm. This is not a man who is just like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know what the doctrine of the Trinity was. I didn't know the historical conflict between Christianity and Mormonism. I just didn't know, but now I'm clear on this matter, so let's get this cleared up over the air. He has gone on record multiple times now advocating for a view of Mormons that includes Mormon people within the Christian church.
Which is the view that Mormons advocate for.
Correct. This is what they advocate. And so what's disturbing about that is that we are missing the first most important reality here, which is who is God.
Yep.
And God as triune is the most important thing for us to cling to in our first understanding of where our differences lie, because we see Scripture being very, very, very clear about the fact that we have a God who is, this even goes to the name Elohim, right? Elohim is a plural word. So we can say, all right, God, there's some plurality that exists even in the Hebrew word for God. And yet we have God saying that, there's one God. So we have to kind of reckon with some certain things, going to Genesis 1. What does it mean that God is making man in our image after our likeness? Is that just the royal we that's being used? But, we see consistently then throughout the Old Testament, there are hints that are made. You have one of the Psalms that is quoted in Hebrews, I believe chapter 1 or chapter 2, where it talks about your throne, O God, is forever. And so this is God speaking of God. You're thrown like, well, how is it God is speaking to himself? What's happening here? And so really, on some level, a Jewish person reading through the Old Testament should not be surprised that there is something more than just a monad, as it were,
right,
within God as being just one person and one God. So when we look at things like Islam, which sees God as this solitary being who just exists unpersonally, right?
Yeah.
Or impersonally, whatever I guess words to negate personal in front of it. Say, okay,
which is what's interesting
different.
that you say it that way, because Allah is a person, but without any of the person things.
Yeah, no attributes
relational
of personality.
Things,
Exactly.
Other than revealing part of his will in the Quran, it's like the question is, what is personal about the person?
Exactly.
And I think that's where, so the Quran is going to claim that God is essentially loving. And here is where we can do a little bit of logic and say, okay, if God is absolutely by himself, how can he be essentially loving?
Right.
Okay. What is it to love? We would say love requires an object of love. And so if Allah exists all by himself, before everything, there is no object to love.
Right.
Until he creates, at which point, for him to be essentially loving, he needs the creation. Mm-hmm. And that's where we start to get into views of God's dependence. We want to, sometimes modern worship songs can try to talk about God's love for his people as if he needed his people.
Right.
But that's not what the Christian church believes. The Christian church believes that God is so abundantly life-giving that all alone by himself throughout all eternity, he was perfectly happy within himself, a father loving his son, loved by his son in the fellowship of their spirit.
Yeah.
Fine, forever, happy, eternally, and yet so abundant that he chose to spill out into creation. Right. He does not need creation. That's all over the Bible.
Right.
Hey, what are you going to offer me? What do you have that I have not given you? Those kind of things. We do have to say, if Allah is absolutely singular by himself with no creation, he cannot be essentially loving because you need an object to love. But if God is eternally a father who gives life to a son, eternally a son, not creating a son, but a father that spills out life into his son by his spirit forever, he can be loving. And he can be loving before he creates. And then he can create out of love. And then he can redeem out of love. And he can redeem sinners who can offer nothing to him because he needs nothing from them, because he is in himself abundant life and love.
Sure.
It makes much more sense to see God as triune and loving. Now, other religions don't claim that God is love, and that's fine. But with this one, Islam has a claim that God is essentially loving, and Christians should say the Trinity makes more sense of that. A couple quick hitters. If you want more on the Trinity, we do have a podcast in our Affirmations of Faith series on the triune God. I did want to hit on the idea of God being love. A couple more things to think about, particularly in terms of talking to someone who is coming from a Muslim point of view. If you hear something like Christians believe in three gods, or you just want to be able to say, no, we don't.
Right.
Let's read the Bible, or let's read Christian doctrine. One of the things that you can do to make inroads with someone who's coming from the Islamic standpoint is help them see how something they've been told that Christians believe, Christians don't actually believe. And so if it's something like Christians believe that God sullied himself by copulating with a woman to make a son, you're like, that's not what we believe. Can I show you what we believe? And at the very least, that does what we said earlier, which is it causes doubt in the authoritarian structure. Yep. And so just a couple things to keep out. If someone says the Trinity is not logical, you can say it's actually perfectly logical if we believe that God is Father eternally, that he would need a son eternally. It would be illogical for him to be a father eternally without a son, because to be a father is to have a son. Right. And so that's actually supremely logical. And so these are a couple of different responses. The Trinity, we do not believe in three gods. Can I show you? The Trinity is not illogical. Can I tell you? Those would just be a couple quick hitters. And we're going to have to be prepared with Trinitarian theology because, as you said, Chris, it's the core of who God is. And as we will see over the next few weeks, it is really the core point of departure for other heresies. Yeah. So that's going to wrap up Islam. There's so much more. I've got books you could read if you're interested. If you come across in the next year or 10 a Muslim friend and you start engaging with them, this would be be a great chance to use your pastors and say, hey, you guys talked about this. I forgot everything you said. Could you help me?
Yeah.
Like
James
great.
White, as you had referenced earlier, James White has some very good stuff. James White, a very solid theologian who does engage in debates with Muslim apologists. And you can find those on YouTube. Definitely a great resource as well if you want to see this in action.
So we hope this has been helpful. We hope throughout all of this, we are not only showing you why not all religions are the same, but we are showing you why Christianity is supreme, supremely satisfying, supremely true, leading us to love and adoration for the triune God. This was a time to think.